I figured it would be a nice surprise to prepare my wife a nice home-cooked lunch, since I was on leave and she loves my cooking, and take it to her during her lunch break. Anyway, long story short, I went right into her office. I usually just barged in without knocking, and found them on the floor of her office. I threw the food at them, physically picked him up and threw him off of her. Asked her if she wanted a divorce. She said yes, and that she loved me but was not in love with me. Sat there in disbelief for 15 minutes before I went home, packed up the kids and went to a hotel. Needless to say, we got a divorce shortly after. Anyway, Redditors who caught your significant other red-handed while they were in the act of physically cheating, what was their excuse? How did it go down? So I'm at work finishing up a job at a hotel. I work in construction. We pull around to another parking lot to have a morning break/call shop to see where we're headed next. I'm on the phone with my boss when I look up to see my girlfriend, of a year and a half, walking out of a hotel with a guy holding hands flirting, the works. They proceed to make out while I hang up on my boss to take some pictures. I get out of my truck and my coworker looks at me like what the hell, and I walk over to them and greet my girlfriend. She looks at me shocked and tries to straighten herself up, seeing as she looks like she just had slept with someone, which she did. The dude looks at me like what the hell, and turns out he had no idea she had a boyfriend and apologizes to me right away. Turns out he's been through the same situation and felt terrible. My girlfriend still tries to deny everything even though the guy just blew her in. I looked at her and wished her well. I got back into the truck and a coworker overheard everything and doesn't say a word. Fast forward to 5 p.m. and I start my other job, line cook at a local restaurant. My girlfriend works there too and shows up looking like she got hit by a freaking freight train. Presents herself very awkwardly towards me and I act like I couldn't care about what happened because it'll confuse the hell out of her. I finish my shift and go to my house and pack all her things into boxes and drive over to her house and dump it all in her front yard. This all happened last month and she still acts very awkwardly/held back when she sees me at work. I try to avoid talking to her unless I need to, and when I do I say everything with a smile, which I know kills her. This relationship seemed like it was the one, but apparently not, and luckily I've been able to move on. More background. I'm 19 and she's 28. I guess some people don't mature with age. I'm late to this, but I'll post up. Here's the scene. I race local autocross events with a close group of my good friends, being a team of sorts. Well, the first event of the season was happening that weekend, and as per usual, everyone stays at my house for the 2-day event since I'm only 10 miles away from that venue. My, now ex-wife and I had been a little strained and whatnot for about the month prior. Mostly her being distant and insisting she wanted space just to clear her mind. We had a newborn, so completely understandable. Anyways, we have her parents watch our daughter for the weekend and plan to just have a fun weekend with all of our friends to blow off steam. Well, the night before our test and tune, much drinking and fun was had by all. Things were generally fun. During the test and tune, my ex-wife continued with the whole distance thing and not being very talkative or interested in what was going on, mostly on her phone the whole time, and a couple times I couldn't find her when I needed her help with something. Later that night everyone gets back to the house, I make food for everyone and finally get to take a shower. I get done with my shower and walk back down the hall of our house and notice the smoking room's light was on. In my head I thought, sweet. I shall partake. I open the door to see my best friend, and best man at my wedding, getting blown by my now ex-wife. My reaction was just to say, oh, what the hell? Slammed the door and went to my room and just sat down in shock. From what my friend said, my then buddy told everyone he had a family emergency and had to bail on the race and booked it out of there. He's a big dude, but he knows I conceal carry, so that's the only reason I can think of that he still to this day avoids me. My wife, now ex, didn't really say anything. Later on I learned they had been doing this behind my back for months, and when I filed for joint custody, my ex-best friend and ex-wife did everything in their power to try to keep me from seeing my daughter. TLDR. Caught wife blowing best friend/best man at my wedding in my house while I had a bunch of friends over for a race, and they tried to make my life hell during the custody battle. I was 21 and was dating this girl for about 2 years. It was a rocky relationship to begin with, and it was partially my fault for dealing with her constant crap for so long. We worked together, which I assumed didn't make things better. Hindsight is 20/20. One night, we had plans to hang out after I got off of work, so I called her a few times only to get her voicemail. She had just moved into a new apartment with her brother, so I assumed that she was preoccupied with doing things around the place. How little did I know the things that were being done. So, I went home, washed up, and headed over there. It hit the top of the stairs and saw that her front door was opened about 4 inches. Now, it was around 10 p.m. at the time, so it got me worried. After a few seconds of hesitation, I slowly opened the door to a pitch-black apartment. I called out her name a few times to no response. This is where I started to worry. Not that it was unlike her to be so aloof to leave her door open, but there was something in the air that just didn't seem right. So, I slowly approached her bedroom door and gave it a soft rap as I softly said her name. To my surprise, she responded. I felt immediately relieved that she was okay, so I instinctively opened the door only to do an emotional 180. I walked in on her in bed with one of our mutual friends, and one of the guys I'd least expect it from. From here on was kind of a blur. I vaguely remember yelling at her, the words "leave me," then I threw whatever was in the glass on her nightstand in her face. Judging from the wince of pain she made, it was orange juice. That prompted the douchebag in bed with her to stand on the bed and lunge at me. Now, this part I do remember. Everything was in slow motion, and I turned into Neo from the Matrix. I saw him drop his shoulder, then straight right came right at my face. I couldn't have been any more Mayweather if I had tried, as I dipped out of the way of his punch and landed the stiffest right hook I've ever landed. His knees buckled and he fell into my chest, and he immediately began pouring blood from his eyebrow. I threw him off me and left. I heard later that I broke his eye socket and his eye would still bleed in the shower a month later. Luckily I didn't do any long-term damage. I decided to get really drunk that night and stupidly drove home. The next morning I got a phone call from the police department asking the whole incident and if I would turn myself in the next day. I complied. The worst part, other than that piece of trash I was with cheating on me with a friend and going to the cops after I broke his face, was having to tell my parents that I was going to be arrested. I told my mom, and she was upset, but then I had to call my dad at his work, which was terrifying. One of the best parts of this story was when I finished telling my dad what had happened. He was silent for what felt like 5 minutes but was likely only 5 seconds. The first words out of his mouth were, "Wait, so you didn't hit her?" My dad was an awesome guy, and I think he realized that chewing my head off would only make things worse. Also, when I was in making my statement to the police, the office doing the interview was a huge prick and said, "You can't just go around hitting people blah blah blah," to which I said, "If you found your wife in bed with another guy, wouldn't you have a similar reaction?" Of course, like a true douchebag, his response was, "Of course not." Again, after my dad heard him say that, he picked up the picture of the guy I punched, laughed, and said, "I'm proud of you." Not much after that other than court. Pretty uneventful since I had no priors and the douche friend didn't show up. Got a year probation, and would do it all again if I had the chance. She wanted a few days to get her head straight. She had recently moved out after 3 years, so I said, "Anything you want." After 2 days of no communication, I couldn't take it anymore. I bought her favorite flowers, and drove an hour out of town to buy her cotton candy, her favorite thing. I still remember how hard my heart was beating for the sheer fact of how much I loved her and wanted to marry this girl. I show up at her place ready to profess my undying love, and I'm greeted by some dude coming out her door with his shirt off. My heart stopped. I said, "Who the hell are you?" He said the exact same thing. I was ready to fight based on instinct. He said he had no idea and literally grabbed his stuff and left. There's more to it, but that's the gist. Then she came out. She said it was my fault and I didn't prove I loved her enough. I'm sure a lot of you in this thread went through the very next thing. My heart sunk. I was crushed. I said a few things, started mumbling, couldn't focus on anything to say. I felt the tears coming and didn't want her to see. I walked out, got in my car, bawled all the way home, drank a whole bottle, and drunk dialed her mom to say goodbye. We were close, called my mom, and eventually passed out on my kitchen floor in a literal puddle of tears. It sucked. I'd not wish that emptiness on my worst enemy. Being betrayed, losing your best friend, lover, all in the span of seconds. I'll never forget that ache. Woof. I was seeing this guy, and we had gone on a few dates, and he was cool. An airline pilot, had his own two-seater airplane, a house, and a couple dogs. We'd go out and grab ice cream or something and then just chill afterward, playing video games, listening to music, etc. So then one night he asks me over to his place unexpectedly for a party. I say, sure, why not? Then and there, in front of everyone, he asks if I'll be his girlfriend. Cue cheesy applause and cheers. Plus some free beer. I liked him, so I said all right. The next few hours were just chilling and not doing anything. Then he disappeared into a back room with several girls and came back out half naked and absolutely covered in hickeys. So, I asked him and he brushed it off. Well, I was too drunk to drive, so I stayed around to sober up a bit before leaving. I just sat on the couch and watched TV, I hate TV, and everyone else was outside. And about half an hour of TV later, he comes inside with a gaggle of nude girls around him, and drops his pants and demands me to blow him. Didn't ask for it, and when I questioned him, he demanded it again and grabbed at me. So I did the only logical thing, slapped him, picked up my shoes and keys and left. One of the girls was screaming, and one of the guys had full-on picked her up so she wouldn't come after me. I drove a couple blocks, and called a friend to come drive me home. I got a phone call the next day, from his best mate, asking what was going through my head when I decided to slap a drug dealer, in his own home, surrounded by coked-up lackeys. Also informing me I had bruised his face and his cheekbone was all swollen. I'm still proud of that, and that if I hadn't driven off, I probably would have been beaten by the crazy girls. Oh, and, by the way, did I want to come over to snort some coke with them later? I told them to shove off and leave me be. They kept harassing and threatening me for ages until I told them they could leave me alone or I'd go to the cops, despite threats I had better not. They left me alone. This thread is too old now, but it will feel good to get this out. I dated a guy once for about a year. We had hit a rough patch and decided to break up. A few weeks pass and we both decide we've been crazy. We apologize for the things we've done and decide we're going to work things out. He tucks me into bed one night, we lived in the same apartment building, and tells me how much he loves me. He asks me if I'll come back to his place where everyone is hanging out. I tell him I have work and just need to get to sleep. About halfway through the night I start getting an awful sick feeling in my stomach. I'm lonely and I just want to be with him. I walk over to his place and knock on his door. I text him and call him a few times. No answer. I figured he was just sleeping, so I knocked louder trying to wake him up. Eventually his roommate answers. I apologized for being so loud and head to my ex's room. Just before reaching the door I see my roommate, stark naked, in his doorway, giggling. I broke down. He came out and starting apologizing and we talked until 6 a.m. He explains that he'd never gotten over some of the stuff we went through and he just needed to get this out of his system in order to forgive me. I understood that, so I forgave him and we moved on. I ended up consoling my hungover roommate as she cried the following day because she had cheated on her significant other with my boyfriend. 3 days later, I made dinner for him and my roommate. We cuddled on the couch a bit afterward. I mentioned that he's paying too much attention to her for my comfort. We say goodnight, he tucks me into bed again, tells me how much he loves me, and begs me to come back to his place. He says he just wants to sleep. I explained to him that I couldn't stand the idea of sleeping in the bed he just screwed her in. I needed time. He goes home. The following day he comes to my place after work. And we sit down to watch some TV together. He says he has to tell me something. And with the biggest crap-eating grin on his face he says, I slept with Kathleen again last night. I slapped him in the face and went to my bedroom and started packing. He and Kathleen are still together from what I hear. It's been years and I actually just got married in June. Apparently he also got fat and developed a drinking problem. I was a nanny to two lovely little girls in college. The mom owned a chain of restaurants and the dad traveled a lot for work. He was a total prick. In the 5 years I worked for them, I saw him maybe 4 times. One of those times, I had put the girls to bed and he came in covered in dirt. He owned a company that worked with a lot of machinery, I won't bore you, and said he needed a shower, so I said goodbye and showed myself out, but then realized that I left my jacket in the bathroom. I went back in and called to him from his bedroom doorway that I left the jacket. This man came out covering his junk with one hand and my jacket in the other, and asked me if I wanted to hang around. What? No, dude. Anyway, the wife found some printed emails that were pretty intense when she had to borrow his work truck. Turns out this dude was sleeping with his secretary. So she called me over one Saturday because she had some business to take care of. She never came home that night. I called her office the next morning and no one had seen her. I called her husband in his office and got voicemails. So I hung out. Monday morning, still nothing. I call Grandma. She knows nothing. Finally, Monday afternoon I get a phone call that she's in jail and needs me to come bail her out. So I pull out $8,000 from her family safe, drop the kids off at the neighbors, and go bail her out. She went to the woman's house and found her husband's car in the driveway. She walked right in and found her husband and the woman in the shower together, and proceeded to beat the living hell out of both of them with a baseball bat. All 3 of them went to jail. The secretary and the husband for something else. I think she had a warrant and they found drugs in the house. Something like that. I got a Christmas card from them this year. They're still married.